Before we begin, picture this. You are sitting in a meeting. The room is calm. The lighting is fine. Nobody is pointing a weapon at you. You have a coffee in front of you and a chair beneath you, and by every measurable standard, you are completely safe. And then your manager says, "Can we talk about the numbers from your team this quarter?" What happens in your body in the 3 seconds that follow? For some of you, a heat rises in your chest, and you feel an immediate urge to defend yourself, to explain, to go on the offensive before you have even heard the rest of the sentence. For others, your mind starts quietly mapping the exits. Maybe you could ask to reschedule. Maybe you could send a follow-up email later. Maybe you could steer the conversation somewhere safer if you just talk fast enough. For others still, your mind goes completely blank. You know this material. You have lived this material for 3 months. And yet the second the threat appeared, it was gone like someone reached in and wiped the whiteboard clean. And then, for some of you, you hear yourself saying, before a single accusation has been made, before you have heard anything other than the question, I know, I'm so sorry, I'll do better, it won't happen again." None of those reactions were chosen. Not one of them. You did not deliberate and decide. You did not weigh your options and select a strategy. Your body moved before your thinking mind even got its shoes on. And if you have ever felt embarrassed or confused or frustrated by the way you responded to a difficult moment, the way you went cold when you meant to stay open, or ran when you meant to stay and face it, or disappeared inside yourself exactly when you needed to show up, this audiobook is the explanation you have been waiting for. Because there is nothing wrong with you. There never was. There is only something very old inside you, doing a very faithful job. Let's talk about the part of you that predates language. Here is something worth holding in your mind as we begin. Every creature alive today, every bird and fish and mammal and reptile, is descended from something that survived. Not just survived occasionally or survived under ideal conditions. Survived well enough, consistently enough, across enough generations, to keep passing life forward. And what that means is that encoded somewhere inside every living creature, including you, is an accumulated library of survival strategies. Strategies that have been tested by reality across an almost incomprehensible stretch of time. Your body has been solving the problem of survival for hundreds of millions of years. Not your body specifically, of course, but the biological line you belong to. The chain of creatures that leads, impossibly, to you. Every one of them faced threats. Every one of them found a way through. And the strategies that worked got passed forward, written into the architecture of the nervous system, layered generation by generation into the body you are living in right now. You carry that entire history with you, every moment of every day. And when you feel threatened, that history responds. It does not wait for your reasoning mind to assess the situation. It does not ask for your input. It has been handling threats since long before reasoning minds existed, and it is extraordinarily good at its job. Now here's where things get interesting, and where most people's self-understanding falls short. The modern world has given us a very specific kind of threat, not predators or rival tribes or starvation, but the threats of rejection, judgment, conflict, abandonment, humiliation, and loss. The threat of the relationship ending. The threat of being seen as inadequate. The threat of someone's disapproval. The threat of not having enough, being enough, doing enough. These are the threats that fill modern human lives. And your ancient survival system has to deal with them, using tools it built for a completely different world. It is the best it can, but the fit is not always elegant. Now we need to understand why your body misreads the room. There is something your nervous system does that, once you understand it, will explain an enormous amount of your life. It scans, constantly, automatically, below the level of your awareness. Your body is reading every room you walk into, every conversation you enter, every silence between words. It is picking up on tone of voice, facial expressions, the tension in someone's posture, the energy in the space. And it is running all of that through a filter that was built very specifically on your personal history. Not history in general, your history. If you grew up in a home where the atmosphere was mostly stable and warm, where adults were predictable and safe, where love did not come with conditions or consequences or sudden withdrawals, your filter learned something important. It learned that the world is, by default, okay. Threats are real, but they are also identifiable, and they have edges. Safety is not something to be suspicious of. But if you grew up somewhere less certain, and a great many people did, your filter learned a different lesson. If the mood in your home could change without warning, if the people who were supposed to protect you were sometimes the very people you needed protection from, if you had to read every room you walked in just to figure out whether it was safe to breathe, your filter learned to stay alert. Always. Just in case. Because in your early experience, danger could come from anywhere, and relaxing your guard was a luxury you could not afford. That filter does not simply update when your life changes. It does not look around at your adult life, notice that things are different now, and recalibrate itself. It carries its early lessons forward, applying them to new situations, new relationships, new rooms. Which means you can be a fully grown adult, sitting in a genuinely safe environment, surrounded by people who mean you no harm, and your body is still scanning for danger with the sensitivity it built in a world that required it. This is why you can know you are overreacting and not be able to stop yourself. The knowing is in one part of you. The reacting is in a completely different part. And in the moment of threat, the reacting part is in charge. It is also why the work of changing your responses is not, at its core, a matter of thinking differently. You cannot logic yourself out of a body-based response. You have to reach the body itself. But we will get to that. First, let us meet the 4 responses. And to do that, I want to introduce you to 4 people. You may recognize some of yourself in each of them. Response 1 is fight. Marcus is 41 years old. He is a project manager with a reputation for results. People respect his competence and sometimes find him hard to work with. He pushes back in meetings, hard, even on small things. When he feels cornered in a conversation, his voice gets very quiet and very controlled in a way that the people around him have learned to recognize as a warning. At home, he loves his kids fiercely, and he is also the kind of father who struggles to let things go. A small frustration about the dishes can become a bigger conversation about respect, and he often finds himself wondering afterward how things escalated so quickly. He does not think of himself as an angry person. He thinks of himself as someone with high standards who does not let things slide. But if he is honest, and sometimes late at night, he wonders why he is always fighting something. Marcus's nervous system defaults to fight. The fight response activates when your body assesses a threat and decides it can be confronted. The energy moves outward toward the source of danger. Your muscles tighten, your jaw clenches, your heart rate rises. Something inside you orients itself forward toward the problem, ready to push back. In situations of genuine physical danger, this response is extraordinary. It is the thing that makes ordinary people capable of extraordinary feats in moments of crisis. But physical danger is not where most of us live. Most of us live in conversations, in relationships, in professional environments where the threats are social, not physical. And in those environments, the fight response does not disappear. It just changes its weapons. Instead of fists, it uses words. Instead of charging, it argues. Instead of overpowering, it controls. The person in a fight response during a conversation might not raise their voice. They might become very still and very intense. They might say things with a precision that feels, to the other person, like being cut. They might simply refuse to let something go, circling back to it again and again, because the threat-activated nervous system does not know how to stand down until it feels the threat has been neutralized. Fight can also show up in ways that have nothing to do with other people. Perfectionism is a form of fight, directing the aggression inward, fighting against the possibility of being found inadequate. Overworking is a form of fight, a refusal to let circumstances win. Even chronic busyness can be fight-flavored, an aggressive stance against stillness, against the vulnerability that comes when you're not doing anything. The critical thing to understand about people who carry a dominant fight response is this. Underneath the hardness is almost always fear. Marcus's father was a man who believed that showing weakness in any form was an invitation to be taken advantage of. He raised Marcus with that belief, modeled it constantly, and punished deviation from it. What Marcus learned, before he could articulate any of it, was that the world will hurt you if you give it the chance. So you do not give it the chance. You stay ready. You stay strong. You push before you get pushed. That lesson kept the young boy safe in a particular kind of home. It is now the operating system of a 41-year-old man who cannot figure out why closeness feels so much like threat. Response 2 is flight. Catherine is 34 and has lived in 4 cities in the last 10 years. She tells people she loves new experiences, and she is not lying. She does love them. She is the first to try a new restaurant, the first to sign up for a new project at work, the first to make a friend in a new city. She is also, though she rarely tells people this, the person who leaves before things get complicated, before relationships get too real, before the excitement of something new wears off and the actual work of it begins. She is fantastic at beginnings and quietly terrified of middles. She is perpetually busy in a way that looks like drive from the outside. Her friends call her ambitious. What she knows, in the honesty of her own interior, is that the busyness is less about ambition and more about the fact that if she stops moving, something catches up to her. She is not entirely sure what it is, but she can feel it behind her. Catherine's nervous system defaults to flight. The flight response activates when the body assesses a threat and decides that the smartest move is not to confront it, but to escape it. Get away. Create distance. Find an exit. Like fight, this response was designed for a world of physical threats, and in that world, it was life-saving. The creature that ran faster and farther from danger survived when the one that stayed and fought did not. Speed and escape were survival. Your ancestors who were most responsible for your existence were very possibly the ones who were best at getting out. But in the modern world, physical escape is rarely an option. You cannot sprint out of an uncomfortable feeling. You cannot outrun grief or anxiety or the slow building pressure of a relationship that is starting to ask something real of you. So the flight response, when it activates in these contexts, finds its equivalent in everything that is not literally running. Avoidance is flight. The email you keep not sending. The conversation you keep steering away from. The appointment you keep rescheduling. The decision that should have been made months ago, sitting untouched because every time you approach it, something in you flinches back. That is flight, living in the mundane architecture of your days. Procrastination is very often flight. Not laziness, not disorganization, flight. The project that triggers anxiety gets avoided not because you do not care about it, but because your nervous system has flagged it as threatening, and flight is your body's way of keeping you away from threats. Every time you open the document and find an urgent reason to do something else instead, you are running. Scrolling is flight. This is worth sitting with because so many of us do it so constantly that we have stopped noticing it. The moment an uncomfortable feeling arises, the phone appears, and the phone delivers, instantly, an escape, a scroll, a video, a notification, tiny exits, one after another, from the present moment and whatever discomfort it contains. The body cannot move. The attention flees. Busyness is flight, keeping yourself so relentlessly scheduled that stillness never has a chance to arrive. So productive that you never have to sit alone with yourself. People in a dominant flight response are often the most successful people in any room because they have directed enormous amounts of energy into moving forward. The difficulty is that moving forward, when it is driven by flight, is not quite the same as actually going somewhere. It is running in a direction, which is not the same as running toward something. The relationships that Catherine leaves before they get complicated are the same ones that might have given her what the running has always been trying to find. The ones that ask her to stay are the ones she cannot stay for. Not yet, because staying means the thing behind her might catch up. And the thing behind her is not actually dangerous. It is just the part of herself she has not yet learned it is safe to face. Her flight response made perfect sense in the home she grew up in. Her parents' marriage was a decades-long Cold War, and the house was thick with tension that nobody ever named. The safest thing Catherine could do as a child was not to be there, to be at a friend's house, to be at school, to be anywhere else, engaged in anything else. She became masterful at finding somewhere else to be. She has been somewhere else ever since. Response 3 is freeze. Sophia is 29, and the person her friends describe as the quiet one, which is not quite accurate. She is not quiet. She has a rich interior life and observations about people and situations that, when she manages to share them, make the people around her pause and say, "I never thought about it that way." The problem is that sharing them often does not happen. In group settings, she watches conversations she wants to join and finds that by the time she has formulated exactly what she wants to say, the moment has passed. In conflict situations, she goes somewhere she cannot quite describe, a distant, muffled place where she can see what is happening but cannot quite reach it. She has been in arguments where she knew, clearly, what she wanted to say and found her mouth simply would not open. There was one moment, years ago, that she still thinks about. Something happened, something that required her to act, to speak, to do something, and her body did not cooperate. She stood there, watching it happen, unable to intervene. She has never told anyone about it, because the shame of it is still too large to put into words. She blames herself for that moment, deeply, consistently, and entirely without justification. Sophia's nervous system defaults to freeze. The freeze response is the one that carries the most stigma and is the least understood. And because it is the least understood, the people who experience it tend to absorb the most shame about it. Here is what actually happens. The freeze response activates when the nervous system reaches a specific conclusion. The threat is real, and neither fighting it nor running from it is going to work. This is the ancient emergency brake, the system's deepest fallback. When this response activates, the body does something that looks from the outside like doing nothing, but is neurologically quite active. Time seems to slow. The mind goes to a distance. Movement becomes difficult or impossible. Speech becomes inaccessible. The person experiencing it is often watching themselves from somewhere slightly outside themselves, present enough to observe but unable to fully act. This response is almost perfectly designed for a particular kind of threat, the threat that cannot be escaped or defeated. When animals in the wild are caught by a predator and survival seems impossible, they go limp. Their body floods with natural painkillers. They appear lifeless, and sometimes the predator drops them. Sometimes the strategy works, and even when it does not, the system has reduced the creature's experience of what cannot be prevented. In humans, freeze serves the same function. When the threat is too overwhelming for the active responses to handle, the system shifts into a kind of protective stillness. It moves the person out of the full experience of what is happening, partially at least, as a way of making it survivable. This is why survivors of overwhelming experiences so often report going somewhere else in their minds. Watching from the ceiling, feeling nothing, going blank. This is not weakness. This is the nervous system doing the only thing it could calculate to do in an impossible situation. Sophia did not fail in that moment. She cannot forgive herself for. Her nervous system made a decision for her before she had the chance to make one for herself. It assessed the threat, determined that its active responses were not viable, and moved into its deepest protection mode. She did not choose that, no more than she chose the color of her eyes. In everyday life, the freeze response shows up in quieter ways. The paralysis in front of a blank page when a project feels too important to get wrong. The inability to make decisions when the stakes feel too high. The blankness that descends mid-argument when emotion overrides everything else. The exhaustion, a bone-deep, unrelenting tiredness that comes from a nervous system that has learned to shut things down as a default mode. People with a dominant freeze response can look, from outside, like they're disengaged, apathetic, not trying. What is actually happening is far more complex. They are locked in a protective state that their system has decided is safer than being fully present, and that state costs an enormous amount of energy to maintain. Sophia grew up as the child of two parents who were both struggling significantly and who leaned on her, emotionally, in ways that were too heavy for a child to carry. The feelings in her home were too large and too complicated and too unmanageable. And so, very early, her nervous system learned its most reliable protection. Go away. Not physically, but internally. Make yourself less available to the overwhelm. Go somewhere quieter inside yourself. She is still there, 30 years later, in that quieter place, safe from the overwhelm, and also, at a cost she can feel even if she cannot always name it, less available to her own life. Response 4 is Fawn. And finally, the response that is the hardest to see because it so convincingly looks like kindness. Daniel is 36 and is, by every social measure, a wonderful person. He is generous, thoughtful, and attentive. He shows up early and stays late. He apologizes quickly, often before it is clear whether there is even anything to apologize for. He is the person in any social group who tracks how everyone is feeling and quietly adjusts to smooth over any friction before it becomes conflict. He is also, and this is the part nobody sees, exhausted in a way he cannot explain. He does not know what he wants, not from his career, not from his relationship, not even from dinner. When people ask for his preference, he feels a small pulse of anxiety and immediately looks for what the other person wants so that he can want that too. He has a recurring experience in relationships where he gives and gives and gives, and then feels a resentment he cannot justify because nobody asked him to give so much. Nobody forced him. He just cannot seem to stop. And then the resentment grows, quietly, below the surface, until it eventually either comes out sideways in a way that confuses everyone, including him, or he ends the relationship to escape the feeling. He has never been in a relationship where he has felt fully seen. He has often wondered why. The answer, which he's only beginning to suspect, is that the self he shows in relationships is not the full self. It is a version of himself, carefully shaped to be what the other person seems to need. The real Daniel stays back, just slightly, just enough, because showing up fully has never felt entirely safe. Daniel's nervous system defaults to Fawn. The Fawn response is, in some ways, the most socially sophisticated of the four. It is the strategy that figured out something the other three did not. Sometimes the threat is not something you can fight or outrun or survive by going still. Sometimes the threat is a person. And sometimes, the most effective way to neutralize a threatening person is not to confront them or escape them, but to make them feel good, to become useful to them, to read what they need and deliver it before they have to ask. In a situation where the threat is a person with significant power over you, and where fighting or fleeing would genuinely make things worse, this strategy is not just reasonable. It is intelligent. It is sophisticated. It requires a level of emotional attunement that is genuinely impressive. A child who can walk into a room, read the adult's mood in seconds, and adjust their own behavior accordingly to head off potential conflict is doing something remarkable. That child has developed a finely calibrated sensitivity to other people's emotional states and has learned to deploy it in the service of their own safety. The cost becomes apparent over time. When Fawn is your default response to any interpersonal discomfort, you begin to lose yourself in installments. First, you stop voicing opinions that might cause friction. Then you stop having feelings that might be a burden. Then you stop having needs that might be inconvenient. And then, somewhere in adulthood, you look around and realize that you are surrounded by relationships, perhaps many of them warm and genuine, but the person inside those relationships is a curated, managed, threat-minimizing version of you. The real you is waiting off stage, safe, and alone in a way that the presence of other people does not resolve. The loneliness of the Fawn response is one of the most specific and painful kinds of loneliness, because you are not alone. You are, in fact, very connected. But the thing being connected to is a performance. And somewhere underneath the performance, the real person is deeply, quietly, aching to be seen. The anger that sometimes erupts from people with a dominant Fawn response also surprises them, because they do not think of themselves as angry. They have spent years being accommodating, agreeable, easy. And then, one day, the resentment that has been quietly accumulating beneath all those yes breaks the surface, and it shocks everyone, most of all themselves. That anger is not a betrayal of who they are. It is information. It is the self they have been suppressing, showing up to say, I am here. I have needs. I have been waiting a very long time. Daniel's Fawn response developed in a home where his emotional labor was required from early childhood. His mother struggled with her own mental health in ways that were never acknowledged or treated. His job, without anyone saying it explicitly, was to manage her emotional climate. to notice when she was struggling before she tipped in a crisis, to be cheerful when she needed cheerful, quiet when she needed quiet, helpful always, and to never, under any circumstances, add to her burden by having needs of his own that were too large or too difficult. He was very good at this job. Children are almost always very good at the jobs that their survival requires. He is still doing it, in his 30s, in relationships with people who have no idea they are receiving the attentive, careful, self-effacing service that was originally developed to keep a much smaller person safe. You might ask why you cannot simply decide to respond differently. You have met these 4 people. You have probably recognized yourself in at least one of them, maybe more than one, because most of us have more than one response available to us, with one that tends to show up first. And you may be wondering, now that I understand this, can I just choose differently? The honest answer is, not directly, not in the heat of the moment. And understanding why is actually very freeing, because it means you can stop blaming yourself for something that was never in your hands to begin with. When the threat response activates, something happens that is not a figure of speech. The thinking, planning, intention-holding part of your brain genuinely goes offline, or at least gets pushed way to the back. The resources redirect. What was being used for consideration and deliberation is now being used for survival. Speed is the priority. Accuracy can come later. Right now, the only question is, what do I do? This is why you can have the most well-intentioned conversation strategy worked out in advance. Walk into the room ready to be different, and the moment things get tense, find yourself doing the old thing. Again, you are not failing at self-control. You are experiencing the limits of what intention can do against an automatic system that has been running longer than intention existed. The fight-response person does not think, I will become aggressive now. The flight-response person does not decide, I will avoid this. The freeze-response person does not choose to go blank. The fawn-response person does not select, from a menu of options, excessive accommodation. These things happen before choice is possible. But there is a space. Viktor Frankl, who survived unimaginable circumstances and wrote one of the most important books of the 20th century about what he found there, wrote about this space. Between the stimulus and the response, he said, there is a gap. And in that gap lives something that looks a lot like freedom. The gap, at first, is very small, almost too small to notice, but exists. And the work of building a different relationship with your responses, the work of gradually expanding that gap, begins not with changing what you do, but with learning to see what you're doing while you're doing it. Noticing, not judging, not fixing. Just, oh, this is the thing that happens. I can feel it happening. I know what this is. That noticing, practiced over time, is the beginning of everything. Because the threat response lives in the body, the most direct path back from it also runs through the body, not through the mind. This is where so much of the advice we get about managing our reactions falls short. Think positively. Look on the bright side. Try to be more logical. Remember that it is not actually that serious. All of that advice is speaking to the cortex, the thinking brain. But the threat response is not generated by the thinking brain. It is generated by systems that are older and faster and that do not, in the moment of activation, receive messages well from the cortex. You cannot reason a racing heart into slowing down. You cannot logic a frozen body into motion. What you can do is breathe. This sounds almost insultingly simple, but the breath is remarkable because it is the one function of the automatic nervous system that can also be consciously controlled. Slow, deliberate breathing, and especially a long, slow exhale, sends a direct signal to the body's calming system, not a message through words, a physiological signal. The body receives it the way it receives any other bodily signal, and it responds. Movement helps too, particularly if your nervous system tends toward fight or flight. Your body mobilizes energy when it senses threat, energy designed to be used to run or to fight. When you do neither, that energy stays in the body, buzzing. A walk, a run, even just shaking out your hands and moving your body deliberately after a stressful encounter helps the system discharge what it mobilized. It helps close the loop. Connection with safe people is also one of the most powerful regulators of a stressed nervous system. Not connection in general. Safe connection. The kind where you do not have to perform, where something honest can be said and be met with warmth, where the other person's calmness is genuinely felt rather than just observed. Human beings regulate each other's nervous systems. This is not a metaphor. The presence of a genuinely calm and caring person does something in your body that cannot be replicated by understanding it mentally. And therapy, particularly the kind that understands that insight alone is not enough, that the nervous system has to learn safety, not just be told about it. A skilled therapist who can stay consistently regulated in the face of your history, who does not flinch at what you bring, who meets you with the same steadiness week after week, is offering your nervous system an experience it may have needed for a very long time. The experience of a person who is safe, reliably, consistently, across time. That experience builds something that researchers call earned security. And earned security is one of the most hopeful discoveries in the study of the human nervous system. It means that what was not given to you early does not have to be missing forever. The nervous system retains, across a lifetime, the ability to update its model of the world. It is work. It is real work, but it is possible. We started this chapter with a scenario, a room, a question, a body that responded before you could choose. I hope you see that body differently now. Whatever it did in that moment, whatever it does in every moment, it is doing the most faithful thing it knows how to do. It is working with the information it has. It is running the programs it built to keep you here. It is loyal to you in a way that nothing else in your life is, running quietly and constantly and without rest in your defense. You deserve to understand that. You deserve to know what those responses are and where they came from and what they are trying to do. Not so that you are excused from working on them, but so that the work you do comes from compassion rather than contempt. Because contempt closes things, compassion opens them. The body that hijacks you in moments of perceived danger is not your enemy. It is the thing that carried you to this moment, across everything that came before, using the only tools it had. Thank you for listening. Till next time on North Audiobook.